I'll invite the Honorable Minister of Health to say prayers.
Let us pray. Almighty God, from whom all wisdom and power are derived, we beseech Thee so to direct and prosper the deliberations of the Legislative Assembly now assembled, that all things may be ordered upon the best and surest foundations for the glory of Thy name and for the safety, honor, and welfare of the people of these islands. Bless our Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Charles, Prince of Wales, and all the royal family. Give grace to all who exercise authority in our commonwealth, that peace and happiness, truth and justice, religion and piety may be established among us. Especially we pray for the governor of our islands, the premier, the speaker of the Legislative Assembly, the leader of the opposition, ministers of cabinet, ex-officio members and members of the Legislative Assembly, that we may be enabled faithfully to perform the responsible duties of our high office. All this we ask for Thy great name's sake. Let us say Thy Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be Thy name. Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For Thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make His face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up the light of His countenance upon us and give us peace now and always. Amen.
Please be seated. This Honorable Legislative Assembly resumes its sitting. Honorable members, I'd like for all members to please bear in mind that we are starting at a very late hour on the very last day of the week. And when we were in Finance Committee, we did remind each other, I guess, that some members had commitments for this afternoon. Having said that, Clerk.
Administration of Officer Affirmations.
None.
Reading by the Honourable Speaker of Messages and Announcements.
None.
Presentation of petitions.
None.
Presentation of papers and of reports. Report of the Standing Finance Committee and the appropriation changes in accordance with the Public Management and Finance Law 2018 revision for the financial year ending the 31st of December 2019, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Finance and Economic Development.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the 7th June 2019 report of the Chairman of the Standing Finance Committee on Supplementary Expenditure pursuant to Section 12 of the Public Management and Finance Law 2018 revision with respect to the government's financial year that will end on the 31st of December 2019.
So ordered. Is the Honourable Minister speaking there too?
Very briefly, Mr. Speaker, and thank you. Mr. Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order 64-7, the Standing Finance Committee agreed that I submit to this Honourable House the 7th of June 2019 report of the Committee on the Supplementary Expenditure pursuant to Section 12 of the Public Management and Finance Law with respect to the government's financial year that will end on 31st of December 2019. The committee met earlier this morning and this afternoon. The afternoon's meeting was not publicly broadcast simply because the meeting merely involved the committee's review of its report and minutes that were prepared by the Clerk of the Legislative Assembly. The committee considered a paper put before it for one item of supplementary expenditure, $1.2 million for housing assistance. The committee approved that an additional $420,000 be added to the initial supplementary expenditure request of $1.2 million. The committee approved, pursuant to Section 12 of the Public Management and Finance Law, a total amount of $1.62 million for the financial year 2019 with respect to TP60 housing assistance. The committee agreed that the report that has just been laid on the table of this Honourable House be the report of the Standing Finance Committee on the supplementary expenditure of $1.62 million for TP60 housing allowance in accordance with the relevant section of the Public Management and Finance Law for the financial year that will end on the 31st of December 2019. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions to honourable ministers and members of the Cabinet?
None.
Statements by the honourable ministers and members of the Cabinet?
None.
Personal explanations?
None.
Obituary and other ceremonial speeches?
None.
Raising of matter of privileges?
There is none.
Government business, motions. Government motion number 5 of 2018-19. Membership of the Public Accounts Committee to be moved by the Honourable Premier, Minister of Employment, Border Control, Community Affairs, International Trade, Investment, Aviation and Maritime Affairs.
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move Government Motion number 5 of the 2018-2019 session of the Legislative Assembly entitled Membership of the Public Accounts Committee.
Question is, be it therefore resolved that in accordance with paragraph 4
I didn't read it, I moved it.
he moved it.
Right.
He moved the motion, so I expected to read the result section.
But I didn't read the recitals. I just said I beg to move the motion number so and so entitled.
It is late, and you don't need to ask if I want to get out of here now, so maybe I moved ahead of myself, Premier. I think I'll call on you to read the entire motion.
Whereas paragraph 1 of Standing Order 77 of the Standing Orders of the Legislative Assembly provides that there shall be a standing select committee to be styled the Public Accounts Committee to consider reports of the Auditor General, A, on the accounts of the government, B, on such other accounts required to be laid before the House as the committee may think fit, and C, on any matter incidental to the performance of his duties or the exercise of his powers as the committee may think fit. And whereas the current Public Accounts Committee, in this motion referred to as the committee, was elected on Wednesday, 31st May 2017, and comprised 1, the Leader of the Opposition and elected member for Northside, the Honourable Ezra Miller, Chairman; 2, elected member for Borden Town West, Mr. Christopher Saunders; 3, elected member for West Bay North, the Honourable Bernie Bush; 4, elected member for Georgetown South, Ms. Barbara Connolly; 5, elected member for Prospect, Mr. Austin Harris. And whereas paragraph 2 of Standing Order 80 authorizes the House to revoke the appointment of a member to a standing select committee and appoint another member in his place. And whereas paragraph 4 of Standing Order 80 provides that a member of a standing select committee may resign from that committee by tendering his resignation to the presiding officer, whereupon the House may appoint another member to fill the vacancy. And whereas upon his resignation as Leader of Opposition, the elected member for Northside tendered his resignation as Chairman of the Standing Public Accounts Committee to the presiding officer, on 7th of May 2019, and subsequently tendered his resignation as member of the Standing Public Accounts Committee to the presiding officer, Mr. Speaker, the motion is incorrectly set out in that it does not reflect the fact that the then leader of the opposition has tendered his resignation both as chairman of the Standing Public Accounts Committee and as member.
Honorable Premier, it
Mr.
seems that the motion ought to.
So, with your permission, Mr. Speaker, may I orally amend the motion?
I think we can agree to that.
And whereas upon his resignation as Leader of Opposition, the elected member for Northside tendered his resignation as Chairman of the Standing Public Accounts Committee to the presiding officer, and subsequently on the 7th of May 2019 also tendered his resignation as a member of the Standing Public Accounts Committee. He tendered it yesterday. Be it therefore resolved that in accordance with paragraph 4 of Standing Order 80, the Legislative Assembly accepts the resignation of the elected member for Northside as chairman and member of the Public Accounts Committee. And be it further resolved that the Legislative Assembly appoints the elected member for Bordentown West as chairman of the committee and the elected member for Georgetown West as member of the committee.
Question is, be it therefore resolved that in accordance with paragraph 4 of Standing Order 80, the Legislative Assembly accepts the resignation of the elected member for Northside as chairman and member of the Public Accounts Committee. And be it further resolved that the Legislative Assembly appoints the elected member for Bordentown West as chairman of the committee and the elected member for Georgetown West as member of the committee. Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the motion is quite straightforward. I do not have a great deal to add except to say that I was written to by the now Leader of the Opposition, Honorable Arden McLean, earlier this week, and the day before the House began, actually, and he proposed that given the resignation of Mr. Miller as chairman and member of the Public Accounts Committee, that Mr. Christopher Saunders, the elected member for Bordentown West, be promoted to chairman of that committee, as he is currently a member. And he further proposed that the elected member for Georgetown Central, Mr. Kenneth Bryan, be appointed to fill the vacancy. Mr. Speaker, the government was of the view that we should accede to the request to appoint the member for Bordentown West as chairman, but the government is also of the view that we should fill the vacancy by the appointment of the member for Georgetown West rather than the member for Georgetown Central. And that is the government's position with respect to this matter, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak? The Honorable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to say to the government and this honorable House that the opposition cannot accept their proposals. Their proposal at this time. Mr. Speaker, the Public Accounts Committee, as we all know, is by far the most important committee in this House and this country because of its responsibility. And in keeping with that, I wrote the Premier, as he said, recommending the continuation of the makeup of the Public Accounts Committee in accordance with the proportions of this House, the makeup of this honorable House, which is the government with the majority and the opposition with the minority. Now, Mr. Speaker, in my 18 years here, we have tried to keep it as close to that proportion as possible. And in the majority of the situations, that proportion. Now, in recent times, especially since 2009, we have endeavored, we have ensured that those proportions were maintained. Mr. Speaker, and there is a reason why those proportions must be maintained. Mr. Speaker, particularly now, with the government proposing such large amount of capital projects. The Public Accounts Committee performs the function of ensuring the people, the government, get value for money. And in the instances where they believe that there is no value for money, then they report to the government on changes to be made. We currently have the airport project ongoing. We have the project of waste management, major projects ongoing. We have the port being proposed, and those projects are major projects, and we need to ensure that government, the country, gets value for money. Mr. Speaker, the only way we can ensure that is to make up that Public Accounts Committee with members from both sides of this honorable House. Because standing orders makes it very clear, one of the fundamental objectives of value for money, i.e., that is, Mr. Speaker, that if that committee is not in agreement with a report that must be made after the Auditor General makes that office's report to the Public Accounts Committee to be scrutinized, that committee, in making its report to this legislature on behalf of the people, the one fundamental thing that makes that committee work and shows it has the ability to what we call it in the political circles, make it the scrutineers of the country's finance, is that, Mr. Speaker, there can be minority reports submitted. Now, Mr. Speaker, what this government is proposing will erase that in one fell swoop. Permit me, Mr. Speaker, to look at Section 74 of the Standing Orders under the subtitle Select Committees. Section 74 of our Standing Orders says, 1. Every select committee shall, before the end of the session in which it was appointed, make a report to the House upon matters referred to it, and where a committee finds itself unable to conclude its investigation before the end of the session, it shall so report to the House. 2. A report of a select committee may contain the opinions and observations of the committee and may be accompanied by the minutes of evidence taken before it. 3. A select committee may make a special report relating to its power, functions, and proceedings on any matter that it thinks fit to bring to the notice of the House. 4. A chairman of a select committee shall prepare a draft report and submit it for the consideration of the committee. B, another member of a select committee may bring up a report for its consideration, and all such reports shall be entered in full upon the minutes of the proceedings of the committee. When all reports have been brought up, this is C, the chairman shall propose the reports in order until one is accepted as a basis for discussion, beginning with his own report and proceeding with the remainder in the order in which they were brought up. The question to be proposed by the chairman on any report shall be that the chairman's, or quote, that the chairman's or Mr. So-and-so report be read a second time, paragraph by paragraph, unquote. When this question has been agreed to, it shall not be proposed on any further reports, but any portions thereof may be offered as amendments to the report under consideration if they are relevant to it. The committee shall then go through its report paragraph by paragraph in Standing Order 51, Procedures in Committee on Bills, and 52, Amendments, New Clauses, and New Schedules, shall, so far as applicable, apply as if the report were a bill and the paragraphs thereof of the clauses of the bill. E, upon the conclusion of the consideration of the report, paragraph by paragraph, and when any proposed new paragraphs have been considered, the chairman shall put the question that this report be the report of the committee to the House. F, the report of every select committee shall be signed by the chairman and members thereof. G, we come now to the important part, Mr. Speaker, in this regard. The report finally to be adopted shall be such as agreed upon with amendments, if any, by all the members of the committee, or failing unanimous agreement by a majority thereof. H, a member of a select committee dissenting from the report of a majority of that committee may, by its leave, put in a concise written statement of his reasons for such dissent, and such statement shall be appended to the report. Thus, Mr. Speaker, making it complete. Now, Mr. Speaker, what the government is proposing is going to destroy that provision in one fell swoop. Mr. Speaker, in the absence of a government member as an opposition member, as a member of the Public Accounts Committee, who is going to provide that dissenting report? Mr. Speaker, the chairman does not involve themselves in the questioning. The chairman, I read it out specifically for that. The chairman reports what the committee votes thereon. Really? Mr. Speaker, if the committee, which has the government as the majority, votes on, as I read, that report, it must go through the phases, and the chairman can only report what the committee requests him to do. After they, only they, can determine that by virtue of a vote. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, there then comes along a member from the opposition who does not agree with the government's position taken. The position the government takes, the government members takes, then a dissenting report, a minority report we like to call them, is by leave of that committee is attached to that full report. That is how it's done, Mr. Speaker. There aren't many times that has been done, but certainly, Mr. Speaker, that provision and that possibility must remain. Thus, the reason why there has always been members of the opposition on there as members. The arguments that we have had on public committee and its makeup has always surrounded someone from the opposition chairing it, because there was a time when government was chairing it too. Now, the key is, Mr. Speaker, is that the reports and the accounts that are being scrutinized is this government's accounts. It is none other than the government's. Now, Mr. Speaker, I could have gone on and pulled out my Erskine May, which clearly states that private secretaries should never make up public accounts committees. Private in England, there are private secretaries to members and parliamentary secretaries. And parliamentary secretaries are removed, but they just made provisions to say private secretaries are not to do it. Parliamentary secretaries, never. Now, Mr. Speaker, because of our size, we are somewhat handicapped here to get members to go on these committees. But we can appreciate that every member on this backbench has served as a minister and councillor and directly into the government workings and the spendings and the likes. Born in a councillor? Oh, you're not practicing councillor, but he is a councillor, I believe. No? Okay, well, he's the only one, and I stand corrected there. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to go there. That we are severely handicapped to follow those type of rules where we can find from the backbench. Keeping in mind, Mr. Speaker, that the House of Commons is 635 people, and you will have 30-something ministers, and so half of that you can find people in the backbench to make it up. But in this case, my proposal was to leave 2 members from the opposition. The member from Bardentown West, most of us will agree that there are 2 people in here, I believe, out of all of us, that are capable of auditing from the professional standpoint who has been in that. And that's the Minister of Finance and the member from Bardentown West. Mr. Chairman, I have served on the Public Accounts Committee. Me and the good gentleman who is now Premier. I have served with the good gentleman from Savannah. At the time, it was Mr. Ralston Anglin who was chairman. And I believe we need to find another member to sit there with the chairman, not to support him, but to ensure that proper scrutiny is carried out in the interest of transparency and accountability and democracy. Mr. Chairman, it is utterly important. And Mr. Chairman, dare I say, that those good people over there would go to the extent that some would think that, but the perception is there, and it cannot remain. You cannot allow the government in its entirety to scrutinize its own accounts. No, not even private sector do that. No, I have a lot of faith and trust in the ability of Mr. Sanders. You know, Mr. Speaker, the chairman cannot submit a dissenting report. He can only ask the committee if one of the members may submit it and they vote on it. The only involvement the chairman has when it comes to the operation, other than setting the meetings and seeing that the meetings go according to parliamentary procedures, is that the quorum of that committee is 3. And during that time, if there is a tied vote for him or her as chairman to break that tie. That's the only involvement the chairman has in that regard. So we see an opposition member on, and then one of the government members and the chairman, and they having a meeting, and there's a tie vote. It's put to the vote, and it's tied. The chairman has the authority. The chairman, he or she, does not have a cast and vote. Thus, no involvement in the committee and its scrutiny and its decision on what needs to be reported. Those are committees. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, we sat here all morning in Finance Committee, and the Minister of Finance can't get involved except conduct the meeting. See that the meeting is conducted properly. He can't be asking himself questions. He can't be answering questions because it does not involve him. It does not concern him. That is the nature of committees. So when you have the government with all its members as committee members, the chairman has nothing he can say, he or she can say. And Mr. Speaker, I implore the Premier and his government, in the interest of transparency, in the interest of good governance, please accept my proposal to put the member from Bordentown West as chairman and the member from Georgetown Central as a member. Mr. Speaker, it is of paramount importance. Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to be measured on this, you know. It's not me, Mr. Speaker. I did my job in the best interest of good governance, democracy, transparency, accountability. I will not be judged on this. When the Public Accounts Committee makes reports under what the Premier is proposing, the government is proposing, they will be answerable for it. This government. If there is an opposition member sitting there, the government can say, listen, that report was done with the approval of the opposition. They will not be able to say that now under the proposal that they are making. It is only the government scrutinizing their own accounts. Mr. Speaker, I said earlier, not even in the private sector you get it. Every company, in legitimate company, finds someone else, an independent person, to scrutinize their account and report back to them. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance has been in this business all his life. He knows what I'm talking about. You cannot expect self-regulation or scrutiny. You cannot expect to do that. It is unfair to the very people we serve, Mr. Speaker. You want to have some independence in that scrutiny. And the only independence that can be arrived at in here is by involving the opposition. That's the only independence we're going to get in here. Mr. Speaker, we cannot, unfortunately, support the government's proposals to do this. It's not right. And I want to work with the government so we can get this right, Mr. Speaker. Like I said, I will not be judged on this. Mr. Speaker, the chairman will not be able to submit a dissenting report. It talks about members. It does not say the chairman can do it. Mr. Speaker, it doesn't say he can't, but the fact is that he's not supposed to. Mr. Speaker, I know I can be wrong, but it's not me to judge this one. The public will judge it. Let's hear the rationale for the government stacking the Public Accounts Committee with all its people. Not all its people, Mr. Speaker. More importantly, these people who serve as ministers. They serve as ministers. And I'm not being disrespectful, Mr. Speaker. I don't want to do that. It is the appearance of bias. They all serve as ministers, and I'm sure they do well in their post. But every day, every one of them are involved in the decision-making of the spending of government money. Not government, the people's money. And now we're going to ask all of them to scrutinize and approve what they did. They already did that. They already did it. Whether it's right or wrong. The objective here is to find someone to say something was wrong with the way the people's money was spent. Or yes, we agreed that is the way it's spent, should be spent. That is what the legislature approved. But when it's not spent in accordance with what the legislature approves, then the government needs to know they need to change how it's being spent. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure my colleagues will agree with me that the executive is enabled by this legislature. That's how it works. The executive can only spend what this legislature approves on behalf of the people that we all represent. And when we then need to be scrutineers of the executive, that is precisely what it is. The legislature is still in charge. And there must be some balance to it. You can't expect the opposition to agree to expenditures, whether you agree or not, the budget is approved because the government must have its way because they run the country. But you can't then curtail the voice of the people that elected the opposition and say, thank you, ma'am, thank you very much, you gave us the money, now we're going to spend it, and we're going to scrutinize how we spent it, and then we're going to tell you that it was spent properly. Mr. Speaker, I implore the Premier to accept my recommendations to have, and Mr. Speaker, regardless of where we sit in here, we have a responsibility to conduct ourselves in such a manner that we do it how it's supposed to be done. Mr. Speaker, my last child is 26 years old. I'm no babysitter. Those days are over for me. These are big men and women in this parliament. And I know what? The people are good scrutineers. They are terribly good at scrutineering. Don't underestimate them. It's their money. They have merely engaged us for a 4-year period to provide the services that they want. Mr. Speaker, I always say it. Democracy is sometimes the worst form of governance. People use a pencil to elect you, to take their money and provide services you think they need. That's what democracy is. Mr. Speaker, I'm disappointed that the government did not consider this. I'm very disappointed. I nevertheless will not give up. I will continue to ask the Premier to reconsider his position. Mr. Speaker, if it is necessary for us to suspend for a little bit and go and talk about it, I'm easy. But if the Premier and the government digs their heels in, I will not take responsibility for it, Mr. Speaker. I'm not taking responsibility for this one. I want them to let us work together to get this right and show the people that we're thinking about them. We're thinking about them, and we are doing it in accordance with all the democratic principles in place. All of the auditing principles, all of the transparent principles, all of the accountability principles. Forget about who we are as individuals. We need to stop that. Mr. Speaker, we love to jump on to the personal stuff. Well, let's leave Mr. Miller there. It bothers me not. But we cannot have the membership with no opposition. We cannot do that. And I'm not going to sit here and allow the government to do that and I say nothing. I'm easy, we can compromise, whatever. Wherever we want to do that. I'm prepared to go and close doors with the Premier and we talk about it. But I can't support this. And I'm not, and I'm, the members of this opposition are free to say where they want to go. But I have told them I am not supporting it, and I recommended that they do not tie this on to their political career, because it's going to come back to haunt them. I thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? The Honorable Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I really wasn't planning to speak, but it appears as if the pleas of the Honorable Leader of the Opposition are not being paid much attention to. And I have to seriously consider, Mr. Speaker, getting up and speaking to this motion. Mr. Speaker, the position that the government members are now putting themselves in is not one that I would wish on anyone. They are going to now become scrutineers for their own accounts. Mr. Speaker, I served as a councillor for my first 2 years as a legislator, and I understood very well the responsibilities of that assignment. And it was even explained to me at the time by the Premier that for those times that I acted as a minister, I was bound by collective responsibility. What we are doing here today, or what is being proposed here today, is that we are stacking the Public Accounts Committee with members of the government who serve as ministers and who, if you follow the same principles, I know people are saying they don't want to hear what I have to say, Mr. Speaker, but I would urge them to listen. If we follow the same principles that were applied to me when I was a councillor, this is a serious threat to the legitimacy of the Public Accounts Committee. Mr. Speaker, I hear the Premier all the time saying that he is only Premier as long as the members on that side choose for him to be Premier. And I don't know if they listen carefully when he says that, because there is so much truth in that statement. Anybody in a leadership position in this honorable House is only in that position for as long as the members supporting that person feel they should be there. So the government members, Mr. Speaker, should not feel that they are compelled to go along with a proposal that is going ultimately to bring their positions into question. And I'm trying to be delicate with my words, Mr. Speaker, because I understand I've been there. I have been in a position where I disagreed, but out of a sense of loyalty and unity, you feel that you must go along with what is being proposed. But deep down, you have that feeling. You know it's wrong. I'm urging everybody, Mr. Speaker, to think about the perception outside of this honorable House, those looking in. When we commit hundreds of millions of dollars in expenditure on projects, the country's money, the people's money, and those who are involved in making those policy decisions, acting as ministers, part of the government, are engaged in managing and administering and whatever it is we have to do, they have to do for those projects, are then going to turn around and sit on the Public Accounts Committee and scrutinize what they have done. Whether you are the most honest person in the world, you could be, let me not say that. You are the most honest person in the world. You have the best reputation. And all of us, we don't, no one over here is saying that anybody's a crook on any side of this honorable House, Mr. Speaker. But the perception and the public perception of what is being done, when that sinks in, when these projects are on the way, you are going to put yourself in the line of fire for some criticism that I wouldn't wish on anybody. We have seen it happen before, and it's just a warning, a friendly warning. Be careful what you're doing. Mr. Speaker, I was saying earlier, the Premier always says he's only Premier as long as the members on that side choose for him to be. This is one of those times that I believe that the government needs to sit down together. We can take a recess or whatever they have to do and sort this out. It is difficult. I know, I've been there. But we all came in here on a promise to always do what is right. This is not right. And if you do not do what is right, I can't help you. I can't. I can only give the advice. But let's not take an action today, Mr. Speaker, that brings the reputation and credibility of the Public Accounts Committee into question. Mr. Speaker, we complain about other countries and regulators and bodies overseas moving the goalpost on us every time we do something to try to catch up with what we've been forced to comply with. What we're doing now is something very similar. We're moving the goalposts because this is not how the Public Accounts Committee is supposed to operate. It really isn't. And I'm not saying this, I know everybody going to say I'm playing politics, Mr. Speaker, and I'm saying this to score political points, and I'm not. I honestly am not. I'm trying to save people from making a mistake. And I can only speak here today and sit down, and then whatever happens, happens. But I'm giving advice, and I've been there. I've been through it. I've had these experiences. I've made tough decisions that you all are not expected to do today, but I had to make some of those too. So, Mr. Speaker, if we remove the ability of the Public Accounts Committee of a member to produce a minority report, that seriously curtails the mechanism, the operation of that committee. today is a day that you have to do what you know is right, Mr. Speaker. That members have to do what they know is right. Today is a day, Mr. Speaker, that we have to put on our big boy and big girl pants and stand up and say no. Life will go on, it will get resolved. But let's be the men and women we were elected to be. Let's not bow to political one-upmanship, political pressure, and let's not think about the next election just yet. It's 2 years away. Let's think about doing what is right. That's all I can say, Mr. Speaker. That's the only advice I can give. I've lived it, I've learned. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? The Honorable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just briefly to give my contribution, some thoughts with regard to the debate at hand, with regard to the composition of the proposed composition of the Public Accounts Committee. Mr. Speaker, I was appointed to chair of the committee back in 2013. That time, I had no idea how a public committee, accounts committee, should operate and how it should function. And I really took it upon myself to do some research and to educate myself as to what really took place in other parliaments throughout the world similar to ours, and particularly in the Commonwealth. What I found, Mr. Speaker, is that generally speaking, your Public Accounts Committee is chaired by the opposition. But the actual composition of the committee mirrors that of the composition of your House, so that you have a majority in your government. The actual members of that government would, members on the committee would be the majority. Government members would be the majority of your committee, but chaired by your opposition. Now, in my first 2 years as a member and chair of the committee, I agreed to do so, simply because at that time we were not considering reports of the government of which I was a part. And so when that time came, I stepped off, and the member for Northside was elevated to that position, but I still remained on the committee. And we still maintained that majority on the committee. Now, we have to look at where we have been today and in this administration with the Public Accounts Committee. It has been chaired by the member for Northside as leader of the opposition, with the member for Newlands as a, Bodentown West as a member from the opposition, and basically 2 members of the government bench. We have a 3rd member. That 5th person sits on our side, but he's not a part of our caucus. Pardon? Nor history analysis will show, 1, he does not vote consistently with us. And on the Finance Committee, as a member of that Finance Committee, he has shown his ability to act in a very, in ways that would suggest.
Honorable member, don't stress yourself to find a ground in that respect.
So the situation we will have, I wanted to get to, Mr. Speaker, is this, that with the appointment that is being proposed, the government, as a majority, will have a majority of members on the board. And yes, we will have 1 member from the official opposition, but we also have what I would only describe as an independent member of it.
As I say, honorable member, don't stress yourself to find a ground.
Mr. Speaker, those are the few comments I wanted to offer. In all seriousness, I don't think that the balance of power and the balance of the committee will be that significantly altered by the changes that are being proposed, Mr. Speaker. And that is my observation and my view. And I thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I'll call on the member from Bordentown West.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I did enjoy listening to the Honorable Minister of Finance and for that moment of levity. But
Was it?
somewhere in his contribution, Mr. Speaker, he pretty much highlighted, I guess, what the real concern is in terms of, I guess, not having control on the Public Accounts Committee because one member of the government decides to think, behave, and vote independently. And Mr. Speaker, that is exactly what the Public Accounts Committee needs, is people not towing the line, but doing what you're supposed to be doing. Mr. Speaker, I, just as a matter of backdrop, and my colleagues forgive me for having a conversation, or sharing a conversation that we had privately with regards to our recommendation or how we came about with regards to the committee. I had said to originally when we had read the Premier's press release and he was referring to the leader of the opposition chairing the Public Committee. If you look throughout the Commonwealth, in many places you find out that the leader of the opposition don't chair the Public Accounts Committee. And normally it's a member of the opposition, but one of the conversations that I had and one of the concerns I had as a member is that sometimes the committee itself gets into policy too much. You know what I mean? And I'm not going to say I'm not guilty of it sometimes, but the truth of the fact is, Mr. Speaker, the Public Accounts Committee isn't there to discuss government policy. Government policy is reserved for the Parliament itself, and we do that through questions to ministers. One of the main purposes of the Public Accounts Committee is basically, in essence, the government has made this decision. Well, now that they have made this decision, did we get value for money? It is not about getting into the government decision itself. And one of the things I said to the member from East End is that, if you're going to be looking to lead the fight against the government, sometimes there may be a temptation to use the Public Accounts Committee to do so. And if that is the case, I don't think that you should be the person to actually chair it, because we didn't want to open back up this whole get into government policy. I think we need to have the Public Accounts Committee maintain a discipline of value for money, looking at operational efficiency, getting into those kind of things. You know what I mean? And I think ultimately that's what the committee is there for. So you can't be, and especially considering that next year now, everyone will be getting into re-election mode and everything else. I took that into consideration. I mean, it would have been very easy for us to just propose a new leader of the opposition as the chair and moved on. We figured the government would have just gone with it. But that was one of the things that I pushed back on, because I know sometime next year the new leader of the opposition will be taking a different fight to the government, and we didn't want that fight to be on the Public Accounts Committee. Most of the witnesses before the Public Accounts Committee are public servants, are civil servants. And sometimes I really feel bad with some of the questions, and I've said so publicly in many cases. I would call witnesses in advance and say, these are the questions, or these are my line of questioning that you should come prepared to answer. And I do that for a reason, Mr. Speaker, in that the ministers themselves are within the political arena, and we do submit questions to them in advance so they can properly prepare. And I don't think it should be a situation where we then have the public servants coming before the Public Accounts Committee with basically nothing to really prepare from and have some idea, when in fact they're not within the political arena. So that was the thinking with regards to official opposition, why we did not propose the leader of the opposition as the chair of the Public Accounts Committee, because we didn't want to have someone in a position that run the risk of getting into policy, and then the Public Accounts Committee becomes a political tool. Equally so, we looked at the member for Newlands as the deputy leader of the opposition. And I mean, he already chairs the House Committee, and there are other issues that within the group that we have him working on separately. And at that point, Mr. McLean said, the member from East End said, one of the first committees I served on that actually helped me in my understanding of government was the Public Accounts Committee, and maybe the member for Georgetown Central, maybe it would be a good training ground for him to pretty much understand how government works and get into the discussion. I also had my conversations with him with regards to his proposed nomination, and I said to him, listen, I do understand, the whole youthful exuberance and the passion that you bring, but I want to tell you from now that if we are successful in this nomination, this is not the committee for it. And that was a conversation I had with him before to say, and I said in many cases, the questions themselves are sometimes proposed by the Auditor General Office, who works with us in terms of formulating some of the questions and getting information that we need to get out to the public. But that was the conversation that we had within the official opposition to say, here's what we want the committee to look like. Now everything is fine, and it's very easy for us to look at what has happened. But, Mr. Speaker, we also have to look at what is going to happen down the road as we get closer to the elections and people move into that full political mode and everything else. And the last thing that we want is public servants being caught in the middle of someone looking to make a political grandstand type statement or something else. So that really was the mindset why the proposal came about the way it was. But it's not that the member for East End wasn't interested in basically becoming the chair of the Public Accounts Committee, is that I had asked him, and I actually requested of him, not to take the position for the simple fact that if he's leading a fight against the government on a policy base, we didn't want that coming over into the Public Accounts Committee. Mr. Speaker, one of the things, and I think it's Section 44.3 of the Constitution, which highlights the fact that the Cabinet itself is responsible to the Legislative Assembly. Now, within our system, the majority of members on the government side sits in Cabinet, except, we have the 7 ministers, the 6 ministers and the Premier, plus from time to time you also have the 3 members that also serve as temporary ministers. We have also had instances, Mr. Speaker, on the Public Accounts Committee where even the member for Prospect, when issues come up that relates to his ministry, would actually recuse himself and not ask any questions. No, we have not had anything yet where the member for Georgetown South have basically been in that situation, but the point I'm making in all of this, Mr. Speaker, is that the minute you have the people who have been temporary ministers coming on, or councillors, when their subjects come up, they actually recuse themselves from the committee. And at that point, it goes to exactly show why we do need independent members on the committee to be. One second, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your kind indulgence there. But the thing about it is, Mr. Speaker, is that we want to make sure that this committee, more than anything, does its job from a value for money standpoint and not get into the political wranglings. Because as we said, our witnesses are primarily public servants, and we don't believe that they should be heavily before that, I guess it's a political cannon fodder. So there are things that we need to do on the committee. And I think the committee, as per, is one of the only standing committee of the House that is actually also within our Constitution. I believe it's Section 87 of our Constitution, which also highlights the importance of having a Public Accounts Committee. So it does have, outside of this House itself, it also has a constitutional responsibility. And I think it's important for us to get the Public Accounts Committee back in terms of what it was that we were designed for. Now, I really do feel bad on the government side that you do have one member that is, I guess, independent and votes his own conscience and does his own thing. But ultimately, Mr. Speaker, that is really what the Caymanian people expect of all of us. As the leader of the opposition said in his maiden speech, every single one of us, as members of this House, took our oaths individually in terms of what it is that we are required to do. And it wasn't done on anything where you have to do this or have to do that. And it's not about just towing the line, it's about really and truly giving the people and the country this relevant scrutiny, the scrutiny that it deserves. Thank you much, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Before we move on, I'm going to ask the Premier to suspend standing orders to allow us to do business after 4:30 p.m.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Order 10-2 in order that the business of the House may continue beyond the hour of interruption.
Question is that standing orders be suspended in order for business to continue after the hour of 4:30 p.m. All in favor? All in favor? Well, the next one should tell. Those against? The ayes have it. I must tell you, I'm not convinced that the ayes have it. The member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Public Accounts Committee is a very, very important committee to the governance of this country. The one thing that makes the governance of this country run appropriately is the way the monies and the taxes of the people are handled. And the individuals charged with that task are the members of the Public Accounts Committee. And Mr. Speaker, as we heard from some other members in respect to the view of what the makeup should be and what the makeup is in other jurisdictions, I would like to reiterate but add on what the Honorable Leader of the Opposition said in respect to what the norm is in the United Kingdom. And he said that obviously we had to use members that were councillors because of the small numbers available in the Cayman Islands. But Mr. Speaker, that's in the case when you don't have enough people to be on the Public Accounts Committee. Mr. Speaker, what the Honorable Leader of the Opposition offered the government in my opinion, was a reasonable option to show fairness and balance. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance himself said, based on his own research, that normally the reflection of the membership is based on the composition of the House. Mr. Speaker, there's 19 members of this Legislative Assembly, one inactive based on the duties of being the Honorable Speaker of this House, that being yourself, Mr. Speaker. So that allows there to be 18 members actively doing the decisions on motions, legislation, and the like. And Mr. Speaker, the reflection of that would be 6 members of the opposition and 12 from the government. And Mr. Speaker, my mathematics are not so bad, but surely 2 members out of 5 would show a true reflection of the makeup of the House rather than 4 members from the government side and 1 member from the opposition. Mr. Speaker, I must say that I didn't think it was appropriate that we highlighted the fact the elected member from West Bay that is currently from West Bay North that is currently on the Public Accounts Committee should be seen as ineffective in any capacity because he votes on what he thinks is the best. Mr. Speaker, it is my opinion that it was implied that because he votes independently, being on the government side, that which, Mr. Speaker, this is my opinion, that stops.
Mr. Speaker.
The Minister of Finance.
So my view that he is imputing some improper statement to me because I never said, in fact, I made actually the opposite statement, that he was quite effective on the committee, not ineffective.
Ineffective.
I said effective, not ineffectively. He said, imputed to me, he said ineffectiveness. Yeah. And that's my statement.
Mr. Speaker, the gentleman from Don Chung Central, in my view, is not imputing improper motives. It's not. I find that kind of hard to accept. He said it's his opinion based on what the member said. He may be misquoting him, and in that case, there may be a need for.
I think we moved past it.
Okay,
and if I had to rule on it, I would say all 2 of them is wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish that the contribution from the minister was more clear so I could repeat exactly what he said better. But it was rather ambiguous in his delivery.
Honorable member, please move on from that point.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But I add that he opened this door which allows me to go into that level of discussion and respect to the debate. Mr. Speaker? But you respect his decision. Mr. Speaker, I respect your decision and I will move on. But just simply to say that I believe that the member from Bordentown, from West Bay North, is being effective in his job by voting on what he thinks is best as an independent thinker. But Mr. Speaker, if there is a concern today about the person that has been nominated by the opposition as a member, that being myself as Georgetown Central member of the Legislative Assembly, if that is by any means a hurdle in the selection of making sure that this committee is properly composed of a good balance of this House, please, I ask of you, find another member of the opposition to nominate. Because if we leave the impression with the people of this country that we think the one committee that is responsible for checking the taxpayers' money, that it is spent correctly, should be the same people who is spending it, I think it sends a wrong signal, not only to our society, but to the rest of the world. So if it's just me that is the problem, I beg of you, put another member of opposition so at least we can have balance, that we know that the money is being spent correctly by good analysis and questioning that will be fair and balanced. And Mr. Speaker, allow me to say this. When I was asked by the opposition leader whether I would consider it, I was honored to even be asked. And like you heard from the member from Barntown West say, we had a chat. And he said, that's not the place for politics. It's the place for where you make sure that regardless of policy, the money is being spent correctly. And I reminded him, Mr. Speaker, I said, let me show you something. This is my manifesto. And I showed him this line. It says, in my promise to the people, it said, I promise never to allow ego, personalities, alliances, or any other bias to hinder the opportunity to work with other elected persons to find the best solution for you, the people. That was my answer to him. And I was hoping that I can show my balance and contribution, because I know that the line of questioning won't be on the basis of whether it's a good policy, but making sure that the money is spent correctly. But if that is the problem, I beg of this government to consider at least making the ratios fair, whereby at least 2 members of the opposition remain on the Public Accounts Committee, which is probably the most important committee to this country. And Mr. Speaker, that's my contribution. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? I'm calling then on the Premier for his right to wind up.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I listened to the eloquent oratory of the members from the official opposition, led by the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, I was reminded of something I have heard you say many a time, that those who burned down the building are now complaining, the fire station are now complaining about why nobody can out, why government can't out the fire. Mr. Speaker, we had a well-oiled Public Accounts Committee. Lord knows I thought it was too well-oiled often because of the exemplary way in which the former leader of the opposition ran it as chairman. Most people, except those of us who were often the subject of the critical reports, and perhaps some civil servants who had to suffer the cross-examination, have felt regardless of which side they were on or are on, that the committee under the chairmanship of the then leader of the opposition was effective and did an excellent job. To hear the now leader of the opposition claim that the role of the chairman is simply to moderate a meeting is, I believe, either a most disingenuous observation by him, or even worse, a vote of no confidence in the ability of his nominated chairman. Because anyone, even blind Bartimaeus, over the course of the last 4 years, 2 years in the previous administration and 2 in this one, would have
Mr.
seen...
Speaker, on a point of order,
What's the point of order?
the member is misleading the House and the country in that he's saying that I don't have any confidence in the member from Bodden Town, or for that matter, any chairman that has ever been there. That's not right. And no, I'm not saying he said that, but it shows a lack of confidence in the member from Bodden Town. And I am saying, for that matter, another chairman, it would be referred to too. That's not right. What I said was very clear. The chairman does not get involved with the members and their questioning and their scrutiny of it, but the chairman guides, which is extremely important. But the chairman cannot, Mr. Speaker, do any reports that the members do not agree with.
Premier.
Mr. Chairman, I hear the explanation. But Mr. Speaker, we have seen what an effective chairman can do in looking at the work of the now member, well, he was always a member of Northside, the former chairman and former leader of the opposition over the course of the last 4 years. So, Mr. Speaker, I really don't know why there is all of this rhetoric and crying. Because, Mr. Speaker, this is the result of their politics. It is them who moved him, the elected member from Northside, as leader of the opposition. And he did, Mr. Speaker, he did what convention demanded, which is to resign as chairman of the Public Accounts Committee. Mr. Speaker, the now leader of the opposition has decided that he will not take that post, and he has proposed that the member...
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
The point of order?
The Premier stated that the members over here moved the former leader of opposition. That is not the case. The former leader of the opposition resigned. No one moved them. So
I'd prefer not to, and Premier, I would ask you to move on rather than to get into, you want it retracted? Well, then it's got to be left to both sides of that. Premier?
Mr. Speaker, perhaps
Reword it?
I inaccurately stated what actually transpired. So it takes a little longer, but I'll try to explain what happened. So, Mr. Chairman, as a result of, first, the resignation of the deputy leader of the opposition, who is the same deputy leader of the opposition now, followed by a letter to Mr. Miller saying that he could no longer speak for the current members of the official opposition.
And they had asked him verbal before that, before of the resign verbally.
I'm not.
I think the Premier is relishing the rubbish from the opposition side, but let us continue so that the Premier can finish his speech.
As a result of
It
those,
is 5 o'clock Friday afternoon.
as a result of those things, and perhaps some others of which I am not privy, the then leader of the opposition, the elected member for Northside, resigned the post. My point, Mr. Speaker, is the same. It is those who burned down the fire station that are complaining that there are no fire trucks. So, Mr. Speaker, it is the actions of the opposition that have brought us to this point, where the House
Mr. Speaker,
and the
point
country...
of order.
Member for Bordentown West, what is the point of order?
I'm trying to understand, Mr. Speaker, where the resignation of leader of the opposition has anything to do with his membership on the Public Accounts Committee. They are independent of each other. The leader of the opposition is not required to be a member of the Public Accounts Committee.
Premier.
So, Mr. Chairman, the convention has been in recent times that the Public Accounts Committee is chaired by a member of the opposition. Has not always been the case in my almost 19 years here. It has been chaired by government members. There's been a variety of constructs. But convention, if you look around the Commonwealth, convention is that if the leader of the opposition, just like the Premier, has lost the confidence of his team or her team, as the case may be, you resign any substantive post that you hold. That's convention. That's convention. The member from Northside is a student of politics. He's been around this longer than just about anybody here besides your good self. He was first elected in 1984. So, Mr. Speaker, that's what he did. But he did so because of the actions of and the clear loss of confidence in him by the official opposition members. So it is their actions that have brought the country, this House and the country, to this point where we are searching for a chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, having lost an exemplary one, and one who had performed in that role marvelously over the course of 4 years and over 2 administrations. So, for the leader of the opposition to stand up and say, he not taking no responsibility for this is not on me, is a bit disingenuous. Mr. Speaker, I kept hearing this term that the government is stacking the Public Accounts Committee with government members. We're talking about one member of 5 being changed. Not even changed, replaced. Mr. Speaker, the balance of power has always remained in the hands of the government. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, with all I know that will come in terms of the rhetoric on the radio, in the press about this, they have already, on the other side, clearly stated how that's going to play. I know better than to put my government in a place where, for the next 2 years, the government is in the minority on the Public Accounts Committee in the run-up to a general election. And I hear all of the wonderful, sanctimonious statements of the member from Bordentown West about he would accept the role rather than the leader of the opposition because in the run-up to an election, you don't want to have grandstanding and so forth and so on. Tell that to someone else beside me. I have fought for myself 5 election campaigns. I know exactly. I can write the script for how all of this will play and who will be reading what report that is critical of the government. Mr. Speaker, Public Accounts Committee is held openly. It's not in camera anymore. What its work is guided by the work of the Auditor General. That's the way it's always ever been. So pray tell me, what kind of shenanigans anybody in Public Accounts Committee can do with the opposition in the chair and the Auditor General sitting there and the meeting held in public that no one is going to know about? Mr. Speaker, as has been indicated by the Minister of Finance, and what is widely known, but you just look at the record in this House. The member from West Bay West, North, West Bay North, sits with the government. And, Mr. Speaker, he supports me, that I know, as Premier. He does not caucus and has never caucused with the government. He made that clear from the beginning. He is not in opposition to the government, but he is independent of what the government does. He makes his own decisions regarding matters as he thinks fit. So to categorize him or to classify him as a member of the government, if I were in opposition, I would do that as well. But it is a bit of a stretch. So, Mr. Speaker, this big talk about the government stacking the Public Accounts Committee with its members by proposing that we add a member from Georgetown West is good political rhetoric. But it does not reflect the reality. There is no chance of the government getting away with anything in this particular construct. Mr. Speaker, if the member from Northside would have agreed to stay on, I would have been happy to do so, even though he is not with us. But as much as they claim and like to claim independence over there in official opposition, the truth of the matter is, if they are going to be anywhere near effective and have even a hope of winning the next government, they are going to have to gel around a set of policies and positions. Otherwise, they shall scatter like chaff before the wind. If anyone knows that, it is the Honorable Leader of the Opposition. He is an even longer veteran than me because he contested one more election than I did. So he knows very well what he's doing, and I must commend him today. He did a performance worthy of an Academy Award. But Mr. Speaker, he has not shaken my resolve, nor is he going to lead me into a trap that I will not escape from for the next 2 years. So, Mr. Speaker, I am afraid that the government stands by the motion and what we have proposed, and we intend, Mr. Speaker, with your permission, to take the vote on it unamended.
Mr. Speaker,
The member for Georgetown, Bordentown West. Are you
just to be
rising on
clear-
a point of order?
no, well, just wanted to just understand something
Yes.
procedural. I see where the motion calls for my nomination. Isn't a situation where I also have to accept the nomination?
I think, yes, that you, as chair, I would have to ask whether the members now being appointed accept the nomination, accepts the appointment. Yes, I would have to, as chair, I would have to do that.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in light of what has happened here today and understanding how the actual committee works, because it is the work that we do behind the scenes that determine what becomes in public. And if the government members decide that they don't want to hold hearings or call certain witnesses, then I become pretty much ineffective. And if that's the case, I'll decline being chairmanship and just remain as a member.
Honorable, he has not, the member has not said he will not be a member. He has, and the member from Georgetown West accepts the nomination. He accepts, yes. So it's left for me to put the question on government motion number 5.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, may I ask for a brief suspension so that we can consider things? The committee must have a chairman, and if the opposition is declining the chair, the official opposition, we must find someone else because the Public Accounts Committee must function. So if you wouldn't mind a brief suspension.
We shall suspend the House for 15 minutes. So by my watch, 5:20, 15 minutes. The House would be suspended until 5:20.